Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have Dr. Daniel Parkinson on to talk about his new book, and we will provide a link to it also.
Yes, it's Gender Revealed, Becoming Male or Female.
Yeah, so while Jean's pulling it up, Dr. Parkinson, do you want to tell us about what led you to wanting to write a book about gender? Does it have to do more or less with your life experience, or is this where your doctorate degree is in?
Well, I'm a psychiatrist, and so in becoming a psychiatrist, I studied, first of all, medicine, and then we had to get some exposure, substantial exposure to neurology, and then psychology and psychiatry, the behavioral sciences in there. So I got some important background that way that any doctor will get going to medical school, which is to understand embryology and brain development and neurologic development. And that is really important to a psychiatrist too, how behavior develops. And I also trained in child psychiatry, so with even more emphasis on that. So that's where I was, but I was just working as a psychiatrist. So I've had a career as a psychiatrist, and not particularly specializing in that, but just in general psychiatry. But in 2008, I was raised Mormon, but I hadn't been involved in the church since I was 22 or 23 during medical school, when I stopped participating due to lack of belief. So I wasn't particularly involved in Mormonism over the years.
Okay. No mission before that?
I did go on a mission, yes.
Okay.
In Montreal, and I was in a very sort of normal family in Utah, normal background that's probably not that interesting. If you want,
but it is interesting. Shortly after your mission, that seems about right for the age that you basically were.
Yeah, well, I just never had that experience of having God tell me it was true, and so okay. I sort of had this. I don't find it terribly relevant to my book, but my exit story is basically I was on a mission and I was supposed to get this witness, and I just sort of said to myself, well, I don't think I can get an honest answer to a question unless I'm willing to accept no for an answer, because I wanted it to be true. And so I just said to myself, well, I can't possibly get an answer unless I can accept whatever God says, and whether that's yes or no. And was I prepared to just go home if it was no or whatever? So when I did get home, it sort of, I got more of a gradual epiphany just by exposure to information that it was a no and that I had my answer. So I left rather smoothly. I kept sort of a cultural connection for a while, but I left. But then I was gay, so I didn't have much motivation to stay culturally connected either. So I moved away from Utah, moved to Massachusetts, and later moved to Minnesota.
Do you think that helped your studies?
Say that again?
Do you think it helped your studies to not have to think that there's, a religious way of thinking things and a scientific way? You can just purely think scientifically from then on?
Yeah, I think even when I was trying to be Mormon, I was okay with thinking scientifically, and I just never was attracted to being 100% orthodox. I was always sort of inclined to take the information and assess what it was. I majored in BYU in chemistry, so there's not really a lot of conflicts there. I mean, we had to take a little biology and maybe study evolution, but I didn't have any problems with, like, since at BYU, all the professors teach evolution. The geology department, biology, they all believe in evolution. So it's not, even though a lot of Mormons may not, it's not that you're going to be taught to not believe in evolution.
Right.
Conservative University about BYU.
I studied cultural anthropology, and I had a lot of conflicts. I can say a lot. It was an interesting time for sure to be at BYU.
I guess it wasn't with the biology or the geology department.
Over
that issue. I mean, maybe they found some biologist who doesn't believe in evolution. I don't know, and they have them there now. But
there's a couple. I see them on more like evangelical kind of type sites to try to debunk evolution. but yet they're not credible, of course. But they will, if they can nab a scientist who will say, I'm a scientist, and evolution is a religion, then yeah, they can get paid very well by certain groups of people that want to shore up the Bible story. But
and what sort of was a guiding factor in choosing psychiatric studies?
I just was in medical school. I hadn't decided to do that before I went to medical school, but I was there, and it was very interesting, and it partly lifestyle. It offered a better lifestyle, and I liked the idea of working with people that way, and so it just sort of all came together, and seemed like a way of stepping out of the rat race of medicine in a way.
Okay.
So I don't know, some people might choose psychiatry for that, and but it really has been an enjoyable job, all these years. So I feel good about the choice, and yeah, it's been fun.
So did you, I imagine, because I'm just thinking, I mean, even just where I was 20 years ago in understanding gay people, because I was very much entrenched in Orthodoxy, in Mormonism. And I know, I don't remember which one, but one of the prophets had said that it is absolutely a choice, and so that was all I needed to know, that's what it is, because I believe the prophets. And I won't get into it here, but I had a story where I was pretty well publicly humiliated over something that I said something very ignorant in a class, and that kind of started me on this, the very first thought that I ever had. I think I was 16 or 17, like, could the prophet be wrong about something? So I had a long way to go. And especially when I think about like my family and how I was taught in the home that that gay men particularly were evil, but honestly dangerous. I don't know. I'm sure there were studies out then, but just maybe weren't very popular to know, I guess, among the lay people, that I do feel like have been more or less accepted by most people who are willing to accept what the data says, around this, absolutely not being a choice to, just be deliberately degenerate. That's
the Mormon narrative is pushing that anymore. But it's not a choice. I mean, I think hardly any Mormons are still holding to that idea. I mean, every gay person and trans person can just they know it's not a choice. So anyone who believes
I do feel like that's a big difference between, because it was still, I think, very much, as I recall. Again, I was in southern Utah, so maybe we were a bit behind everyone else, but it did seem like there was debate on the topic, whereas now there's not debate on that, at the very least, anyway. Even within the church.
The view has evolved. So anyway, because I was gay, I had an interest in sort of understanding the science behind why a person is gay or straight. And so that got me down the road of also understanding gender in the brain, because that's really, when you're talking about sexual orientation, it's in the brain. And so if you're understanding sexual orientation, you're understanding a process in the brain that's masculinized or feminized. And if it's masculinized, a masculinized sexual orientation is orientation towards women, an attraction towards women. And feminized sexual orientation is a orientation towards men. And then there's all these people who have, who are men but also have a feminized sexual orientation, such as gay men, or masculinized, or women who have a masculinized one, so they would be lesbians. And then there's tons of people in between. So it turns out there's a spectrum. So it turns out that what I learned about that, there was a lot of interest in that and a lot of studies about that, a lot more compared to the issue of trans. But it turns out that when you're looking at that, then all of the studies about the brain, all the studies about gender and the brain become relevant. And so I learned what there was to learn about it. And there was some LDS, there was some Mormon scientist at BYU, Bill Bradshaw, who he compiled a lot of the research and made it publicly available, especially within the Mormon community, specifically about gay men And
I think I saw that. It's sounding very
sort of
familiar.
that it is, it is a thing that is, like I say, not a choice. I think that was helpful. And he also, when he became sort of on board with that, he took also an activist role about organizing parents, LDS parents of gay people. So that was a movement that he was an early pioneer, along with some other high profile Mormons, Bob Reese, who are well known in the sort of intellectual Mormon sphere.
Mormon history.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I think if I remember, he went over a lot of really interesting statistics. There were a ton, but I think I remember one of them being like one of the greatest predictors of having a gay child, a male one, would be that they have an older brother. That I think there was something like that. I think that I recall. Anyway,
correct.
and I
Yeah.
was I think at a point when he was speaking that I still had some belief in this area, and so he was a voice that, because he's coming from this Mormon side and because of his association with BYU, that I trusted to listen to about this, if I'm recalling correctly. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so later on in 2008, my cousin, who is John DeLynn, just sort of convinced me to connect on the online forums about that. And I got a little bit involved in the activism for youth, gay Mormon, LGBT Mormon youth. And I did that sort of as a semi-outsider because I wasn't involved in Mormonism, but I did have the vocabulary and the understanding of the belief system and the culture and everything around it. So I felt like I could help. And so I found right away that the main thing needed, and this was through there's a researcher named Caitlin Ryan who worked closely with Bob Reese and started an organization called Family Acceptance Project. And she just was able to compile a lot of data showing that the parental acceptance was the biggest protection against youth suicides for LGBT youth. And it was found that the suicide rate was high, but way, way, way lower if they had parental support, and even limited parental support was way better than none and more. And so she was promoting just ways that a good LDS parent could also be supportive and not harming their child, and was promoting that information. So I decided that this was the best place to jump on board. And I also started organizing parents. So I worked on a video project called I'll Walk With You. And I made a lot of YouTubes with me and my team that we were interviewing active LDS parents who had gay children who had responded in a way that was healthy, and putting out as a role model. And so this was around 2014 and 15. And
that's I'll Walk With You. That's based on a primary song, and I believe Carolyn Pearson wrote that.
She had been influential also towards in the cause of LGBT Mormons. Yeah. So we started this project, which is LDS Walk With You, and we did a big series of interviews, and they got some audience. But since I was involved with organizing parents, I got acquainted with a lot of the parents at the time, and there was sort of a zeitgeist at the moment where a lot of these mothers were organizing on themselves, and these were friends of mine, and they ended up this very core group that I was sort of hanging out with online a lot, and even at times socially. And they started this informal Mama Dragons group, but that grew and grew, and then it became a formal thing. And so they have this large, enormous group now of 10,000 mothers. It's no longer specifically Mormon, but it kind of grew from there, and we got the Love Loud concerts. And so there was this big
Dan Reynolds
expansion of interest and support for LGBT youth within Mormonism. And at the same time, with some of these Mama Dragons that had started that group, we also started a different group that was a Facebook group called LDS Walk With You Facebook group, which was for parents of LGBT. who were active Mormons. So it's a specific group that is for active LDS parents to talk to each other about how to be healthy parents in the context of being Mormons, and also how to sort of manage your faith. And so they're trying to figure out what to do. You know, some people leave the church, some are trying to stay, but it's hard when you have a gay child to stay in the church.
Do they work with the Trevor Project?
Peripherally, I mean, a lot of the
support materials.
A lot of the mama drivers would do trainings that the Trevor offers on suicide prevention, and a lot of the mama dragons are involved with different organizations in their communities, like the PFLAG and things like that. So there's it's just different things, and there's also the Equality Utah for the ones in Utah, and they were quite well connected with the mama dragons too. So anyway, I was sort of there and when all that was happening, and I was specifically involved in those two projects, the I'll Walk With You Video project and the I'll Walk With You parent group, which is also still going. I stepped away from it because it needed to be run by actual LDS parents and not have a non-LDS gay person in there.
Yeah.
And that is still going, and that's got thousands of parents. I mean, they kind of come, it's sort of really a landing place for people. And if people, I wish I had the link handy, but I think it's a good place for people to go. I don't know if you have LDS listeners. I mean, current or active LDS listeners, but
I think some. So, yeah, Jean would maybe know better than I do, but yeah. But
anyway, in the context of that, I continued to develop my ideas and get more exposure, and I got a very much more concrete idea of why people are gay. And everyone thought it was this big mystery, but I sort of realized that in the science, in the embryology, if you understand sort of a number of different diverse disciplines, you can kind of put together a narrative that really makes sense, because we know how embryology works, we know how sexual differentiation works, we know how neural development goes, we know all these things. And so there's a lot of things we don't know, but we know enough to really say why a person is gay or why a person is trans.
Yeah.
And also
there's a lot of trigger things that need to happen at the right stage of development, right?
Hormonal
and there's just
waves.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things that can go, I guess, differently than maybe what we consider what the norm is or should be, if we even speak in terms of should be. But that's my understanding. So this is not my field, but
actually what the whole book is about. So
yeah,
I'm encouraging people to actually read the book, and then it really lays it out. Now, unfortunately, it's hard for me to say in a few 15 minutes how it all works, because I lay down in the book, in order. Like I try to make it available to anyone with a high school education, basically.
Okay.
But I lay it out in order of what you need to know in order to really understand it. And so I sort of throw in some basics, and that's why it takes 150 pages to explain it. But I give the explanation of why someone is gay and straight. But the book is called Gender, and really in answering why someone is gay and straight, or why someone is trans or cis, you really can't just talk about that. You have to talk about the whole brain and how it is gendered. And those are two examples of very gendered traits. These are just obviously gendered traits. Your sexual orientation is gendered. It's in your brain and it's gendered. And it's gendered for a reason. And if you talk about biologic, there's a biologic reason that most male brains have a sexual orientation towards females, right? But there's also a reason that not all of them do. And so you have to sort of understand the exceptions in order to understand the whole process. So I just went down and really outlined how it works in our development. And so I wrote a book, and I sat on the ideas a long time. I really just got motivated to put it out because of the toxic conversation going on around trans people, because I saw that they're basing a lot of the arguments when politicians are talking about trans people, they're putting out a lot of misinformation about trans people that I'd like to correct.
Yeah.
But I also have to point out that on the other side, some of the defenders of trans people also say some things that aren't true. And I don't think that's helpful. And I don't think anything they say are essential towards trans rights. Any of the false things they say are necessarily helping trans rights, but they might hold very tightly to those beliefs. And so I feel like it's really helpful just to talk. Let's start with the facts and go from there and develop our policies based on reality and not on myths or superstition or whatever this misinformation machine is putting into our heads.
Okay.
So you can't sum it all up in a 60-second TikTok then?
Well, I can certainly hopefully point out some interesting things that you'll learn more about in the book.
Sure.
I want to ask a question. So, and I've been asked this before, and I know this was the idea growing up is that male and female brains are extremely different. And I feel from what I've gathered from my own studies and then just as I've continued to absorb information over the years, that while that's true that there are differences, that maybe not as much of them are are biological necessarily, but that the vastly different ways that male children are socialized versus female children are responsible for creating like the different strengths and different pathways in the brains, male versus female, like due to a lifetime of conditioning. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's the narrative that is very, very popular on the left. And I think it's useful to understand where social and culture factors play a role, because they're massive. But it goes too far when they say there are no differences.
Okay.
That it's all social and cultural. So what I talk about in the book is that I guess the main thing I want to emphasize is that there is no such thing as a male or female brain. That is for sure not a thing. What there is there's every single brain, yours, mine, his, everybody's, is a collection of a bunch of structures and features and traits, or whatever you call them, thousands, hundreds, millions, lots of traits in our brain. Every single one of them every single one of those million traits has been either masculinized or feminized or neither, or somewhere in between. And so what happens in development is our brains.
You mean biologically?
Yeah, most male brains are exposed to testosterone in utero, okay? And that changes some things, but it's not definitive. So every brain will have some of their features masculinized by testosterone or just masculinized by their genes. Like a female might have a brain that they might have a structure that just gets masculinized super easy, doesn't hardly need any testosterone to masculinize. Okay, so every brain is a mosaic. That's what I want to say. Every brain is a mosaic, masculine and feminine traits. So there's no such thing as a masculine or feminine brain, and there's not even a such thing as a masculine feminine structure, but there is a masculinized structure. And when I say that, what makes up, how do we define it as masculine? Well, I just go to the simple explanation is if we take a definition of male and female that for this context, so say we decide that our definition for now is that they have XX versus XY chromosomes. Now, I talk about definitions too, but let's just, for the case of this example, let's call everyone XX female and everyone XY male. Now that is problematic for a number of reasons, but it's useful for in this type of argument. Okay.
Yeah.
So right now it's useful to take all the XX people and all the XXY people, and then we just say, okay, with structure A in the brain, the corpus callosum, what's the difference between this group and this group? And what we have is we have a bell curve with
this like standard deviation. Right?
So there's females over here, there's males over here. Most males are over here, most females are here, but there's some males, plenty of males over here, there's plenty of males over here, females over here, and there's plenty of people in the middle. So what we have is a structure that by this definition is feminized, because more females have trend this way, but it doesn't mean that all males, that there aren't males who also have that, who are,
Yeah. Or females who have
and
it less.
also doesn't necessarily say what's going to happen in the next structure over. I mean, yeah, there's more likely to be other structures that were impacted by the high levels of testosterone. So that's why we get these trends. But
Okay.
every single human is a mosaic of masculine and feminine traits in every way. And the only thing is that males are more likely to have more masculine brain traits, and females are more likely to have more feminine brain traits. But not every female, not every male, and we still can't put a prediction toward any particular trait. So if we're talking about, what we're protesting about stereotypes, which is the limitations, for example, put on women, say that there's a stereotype that they aren't as good as science or math, right? And we know that I don't know if there's statistics supporting that in any way, but even if there is, we can't say that there are no women who are just as good at math as the men. And so it would be a bad policy to limit women, because there's not a trait that we can segregate that way.
Okay.
There's always women who are,
the information should not be affecting policy. So even if it was, like you said, there was definitive data that women aren't as good at STEM fields. The fact is there always will be some, and they should have, if their ability and their desires match other, like,
right.
There's no reason to keep them out of any programs if that's.
And I'm not saying they're not as good at STEM fields. I'm just saying if in
that's
a
just
world they are, they aren't, and that
it doesn't matter.
And the fact that they're socialized to not be as good at it. So suppose there's just some really basic reason about our gender development in utero that makes their brains not as good at STEM fields. It's still a terrible reason to limit those who are good at it. It's so
okay.
But it's also a good idea to just, realize that maybe let's take an area that might not be as loaded, such as being an auto mechanic. I think that, let's just pretend for a minute that there's no socialization that causes women to be disinterested in auto mechanics and men to be interested. Let's just pretend it's purely biological, okay? So it's pretty obvious that more men are interested in auto mechanics and less women, right? But it would still be stupid to limit women who are interested in auto mechanics to be auto mechanics, even if there's less of them, right? Okay, but then again, if we start at age 3 and there's more men, more boys interested in things that are going to lead towards them being interested in auto mechanics and less girls, then that's going to impact society, right? So we get this biological reality. Say that boys are interested in, this is something that's pretty observable. Toddler boys are more interested in manipulating objects. Toddler girls are more interested in social interactions, okay? That's something that's pretty observable. So it goes on to make you think, well, that kind of makes sense then. That's part of the reason why the boys get interested in auto mechanics more than the girls. Okay. And the girls get interested in something else. So what happens then is that we start getting cultural reinforcement, because we have this maybe tiny biological difference that shouldn't really be relevant to how our society functions, but it starts putting into societies this idea, oh, girls aren't good at that, and boys aren't this, and girls think that's a boy thing. And then it does become impossible for girls to do auto mechanics.
Yeah, there's some policing that happens.
And there's this other thing that happens, which is every human has this gender identity area of their brain. So this is where it becomes relevant to trans people. Every human has this structure in their brain that helps them identify what their gender is, which sex they are. It tells them, we're born with this early interest in categorizing people. And one of the first things we categorize is females and males. and we often categorize it wrong. A lot of toddlers will say, oh, cows are girls and horses are males, cats are girls and dogs. They'll say things like that aren't true. But it's consistent with this desire to categorize everything into male or female, among other things. They categorize lots of things, but that's just one thing that every toddler is interested in. And then they're saying, oh, and which one am I? So it's not just, oh, they look at their penis, oh, I'm a boy. No, that's not how it works. The penis isn't the clue to them. What the clue is this internal sense. They sense what boys are. They're programmed to know they're a boy or to know they're a girl most of the time.
Interesting.
And so that is not just humans, it's every species. We have, I talk about the big horn sheep in the book. They herd in gender herds. So all the males go herd with the males and all the females go herd with the males. They get together once a year and do their thing. But the rest of the year, all the females know that they're females and they go hang out with females, right? How do they know? I don't think they're looking at a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're looking at genitals. I think they just know, oh, this is where I belong. It's this internal thing. So humans know it in a much more conscious way. And our knowledge.
Can I ask about that?
Because of our social needs and how our cultures work, this consciousness about our gender is really important to function socially. So we know in a very conscious way whether we're a male or a female.
Yeah. I want to say, I don't
know because we have a structure in the brain that tells us. And why is the structure that way? Because it developed in utero based on the amount of testosterone it was exposed to. But based on some other things too, not just testosterone, but the genes. They might have had a structure that masculinizes really easy and hardly takes any testosterone at all. Or they might have a structure that is really resistant to masculinization, or they might be toxins in the environment that impact that, and there might be maternal stress, there might be access to nutrients, a million things that can affect it that are just, and what happens is this part of the brain makes this pathway choice at a certain period of gestation, a very limited time, probably a few days early in the gestation. It goes down this road, and once it sort of heads down the road, that's where it's going to go. So
I would say I don't feel female. I think like throughout my life, I've more or less been aware of like my female identity, like in the context of my culture. So if I'm just by myself existing, kind of going about my day, I don't often necessarily feel or like have a sense of gender at all. It's always very much in how I'm treated, or things, or clothing, there's just certain things that make me feel that way.
Yeah, that's part of the spectrum. We have people who feel extremely strongly they're male. We have people who feel extremely strongly they're female. But then we have this whole area in between. And what happens to our brain puts you somewhere on there. And there's so much. Most people aren't extreme. Even the people. I mean, what happens is society encourages us to take a sort of an extreme position on gender, but most people aren't that extreme. Everybody, if they're just left to their own devices, and if we didn't have a world where everything was so gendered, there would be a lot of people who would feel highly female or highly male, but there'd be a lot of people who not necessarily. And so, but I do think it's, it is.
I have moments, if I get dressed up, or if I'm wearing like something really feminine, really pretty dress, then I do feel feminine, and I'll like that. But I just remember, I don't remember how or where I heard it, that people do have like such a strong sense of identity, gender wise, that just, I guess, by themselves, they feel male all the time or feel female all the time. I was like, what does that mean?
People teach us. That trans people. Not all of them. There's a lot of trans people who we don't even know about, who just don't care enough to ever present other than how they're, the way that's easiest to get through life, which is just where they're matching their body. But
I guess that makes
trans people who are transitioning is because they feel so strongly. Now, if I was told I had to transition to female, I feel strongly enough that I would be very against that, right? So I don't necessarily, I would say I have a fairly strong gender identity of masculine, that I can also accept that part of that is, cultural and bred to me by my experience after my brain was developed. But I can
Yeah.
say that a lot of people feel really strongly about their gender, and then a lot of people don't, but they're okay with the gender
This
they
helped
have.
me,
There's people who just aren't okay with gender.
yeah, contextualize one of so I have a friend that is from male to female transition, and now I'm just realizing this was an issue for me that I really didn't understand. Again, was because I didn't understand this like really internal sense of gender, even though like I do know that I feel like a female, and I know I don't want to be a male, like you were saying. Like if someone were to say or offer me the option to transition to male, I don't think I would be interested in that. Certainly not strongly at all. And so I think that's why I think that was at least one point where I was just like, why would she want to be female, especially within the culture? She was still within Mormonism, in a culture that's extremely hostile to that, well, hostile to females anyway. And then to go from male to female in that culture, that was a really difficult thing for me to wrap my head around. And I feel like this discussion here is kind of maybe slotting in kind of that final piece of why it was, for me particularly, extremely confusing to try to understand. And I just tried to understand it from her point of view, but now I get it.
Why give up all that power that men have in the church?
Yeah, and especially because I felt like being female for me had more to do with how I was treated or how I presented myself. And so I just thought, why, I guess I couldn't understand this desire to have a physical outside match that gender identity. Cause to me, I don't know, it's just kind of a neutral, and I've been slotted into this, and I more or less, I'm not okay with how I'm treated all the time, but I'm more or less okay identifying as this gender. And so, yeah, so I guess I just didn't see what I was like, if you want to, if you like dresses, if you like feminine things, there's plenty of men who also like that. They can be cis or they can be gay, and also they can wear dresses, they can do hair if they want, they can do makeup if they want. And so that was something that I was like, why do you have to be female to want to wear pretty dresses or to like bows? Because I know there's men who identify like as males who like those things. So again, like I got over it, but again, I'm just saying now this discussion is helping me see why, like me in particular, why this was such I guess a mental kind of obstacle to get over in understanding.
Did you get over it, or did you get educated?
No, I think I got over it, but I'm getting even more educated now. Why that it wasn't, that it had more to do with me and my experiences, why I couldn't understand her, and not just like how I thought the whole world worked, more or less, if that makes sense. Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, so that's why I put out the book but it's not just that. I mean, the book is about gender, right? And so in the book, I don't spend more than 10 to 20% talking about trans people, probably closer to 10. But I have to say the whole thing is relevant to trans people, because what applies to one trait, because I talk about other masculine and feminine traits. I talk about your interest in, I just looked at a lot of stereotypical traits, and just try to point out that, yeah, there's more men who are interested in ballet dancing. And there's also the way our brains work. There's some other observable things like baseball throwing. There's how we move. There's a proven difference in how children throw projectiles. Boys throw them different than girls. It predates where they're taught, and boys throw them in a way that they involve their torso and turn their shoulders. If you left a little girl alone, she doesn't do that. She throws from the elbow.
Okay, that makes sense.
So this is just something that is proven. There's no cultural explanation for it. But then you go on and you go through puberty, the boys also get more muscles and they get really good at throwing projectiles, and the girls grow up and don't have that testosterone surge at puberty, and they don't get big muscles and bones, and they don't get bigger, and they don't get better at throwing the ball, that they're already less good at throwing. So there's this fact that boys throw balls more effective than girls. Okay, but let's go back. Yeah. There's still girls who are totally effective at throwing balls, way more effective than me. I did not get this masculine version of ball throwing gene. I had to learn the hard way. And when you're learning the hard way, doesn't come naturally. So if someone has to tell you, oh, you have to turn your body while you throw when you're 7 years old, it takes you a lot longer to sort of absorb that. So this is just this
And
very
kids
real
know. Kids will say to other kids, "You throw like a girl."
Yeah, and
Boys will say
there's
to other
plenty of girls
boys.
who don't throw like a girl, but it is something that is sort of an observable fact. And so if you're, you know, if you have a little boy who doesn't throw right, if you can understand that and sort of show them how, they're going to get made fun of
We'll
less.
get there.
It'd be nice to have a society where we didn't make fun of children, but
Yeah.
we are, and I would have liked it if someone had taught me to throw a ball sooner, right? But this is just one of those realities of our universe. But once again, we have to really take into account that there are some girls who, without any extra effort, who are totally not trans, who are totally not lesbians, who throw balls amazingly well, totally by second nature. They don't need extra training. So it's another one of those traits where limiting their access to sports that require ball throwing is not a good idea, because they might really like ball throwing and they might be really good at baseball. And but you know, if we're talking about sports, yeah, it might be useful to have a different team for the girls and boys, because they do have different bodies. But I don't get into that debate. I don't talk about that one bit in the book about what to do with sports. That's a discussion I decided to not wade into. But the reason I just bring that up is because it's just another area of your brain that's masculinized or feminized, but it might not match. It is probably true that if I have one masculinized structure, like my gender identity, that maybe I'm going to have more other masculinized structures, more likely, such as my sexual orientation. But in my case, I don't. I have a feminized sexual orientation. I'm gay, so you'd say I have a feminized sexual orientation, but I have a masculinized gender orientation. I have sort of a feminized ball throwing ability, but I have a masculinized something else. I'm sure I have some other masculine traits that I can't think of at the moment.
So you think people reading your book will not just have a better understanding of the issue broadly, but will likely start having a better understanding of themselves and maybe ask themselves some interesting questions about gender?
Everyone that reads it starts coming at me about talking, oh yeah, about they relate to themselves, and that's awesome, because I think society gives us a lot of shame about our, you know, the most masculine guy out there has some feminine traits, and he's trying so hard to hide it, right?
Yeah.
Because our society created some shame about that.
Some very healthy traits, healthy human traits.
Yeah, there's other very desirable traits. For example, I talk about this empathy trait. There's when you talk about little girls that I mentioned, they're more interested in socializing, and from infants, they're more interested in gazing at the faces of their caregivers. So this is another proven fact that's super early, before there's been any socialization. The girl infants stare more at the caregiver's face. The boy infants stare more at objects. Okay. That's just a fact, but there's a structure that controls that.
Yeah.
But then later on in life, we can administer tests to males and females, and they call it empathy tests. And they show photos of people in different states of emotion, like anger, sadness, happiness, and they ask the subjects to identify the emotion. The females score better on the average. Once again, it's a bell curve. So there's more males scoring poorly and more females scoring, but there's plenty of males scoring well, and there's plenty of females scoring. Okay, so they call that the empathy gap. The females have better performance on that kind of a test. You might say they excel, or they're superior at that quality on the average, but it doesn't mean that there aren't males who are just as good as females. It doesn't mean there's females that are terrible at it. It just means that on the average, the females do better on it. But we could also sort of say, well, empathy is good for society. I think that these days there's a lot of people who don't buy that with the current political situation. But I still hold to this idea that empathy is good. The more empathy, the better, right? So
I would agree.
I encourage all these masculine men to develop their empathy, to develop this particularly feminine, we could call it feminine trait, because more females are better at it, right? I encourage the males to develop that particular trait, right? And I think it's hard to deny that society is going to be better if we don't limit that trait to just the females, but embrace it and encourage it in the boys too. And so that's sort of my idea in everything. If we have a trait that seems useful to society right now, let's encourage everybody to develop them as best they can. If we have another trait that's not as useful, another trait the boys have that.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with being less good at a trait that the other gender does better at. Like,
yeah, we shouldn't be bad if I have less empathy than you.
Right. As long as it's about like how much can you have and how much are you capable of versus how much you're suppressing. If this is where you're capable of getting, you should try to match it. And like I'm a very short woman. I'm 5 foot nothing. But there's nothing wrong with me increasing my strength or making that a value and wanting to be stronger and starting to weightlift. Like I will never weightlift as much as a man, but so what does that have to do with me? Yeah. What anybody else can weightlift, gender or my same gender or not, or anything in between doesn't matter for me, and what would help me individually as a person, like to be stronger. So I get where you're going, and I really like it too. I'm a feminist. I think a lot of people know that about me. I get called a man hater all the time. And one of the things, especially because I am a trans ally, hopefully along with all the other LGBTQ, I get this accusation a lot, and it used to really confuse me why people keep saying this, like in comments or whatever. Well, two things. One is they'll try to point out gender differences, and I'm like, what are you saying? Finish your sentence. Because they're trying to point out why it's okay to treat people differently. And that's what you're saying. Like the differences do not give a purpose for treating people differently. But then the other thing I keep getting accused of is erasing gender or erasing like femininity specifically is usually what they're. Well, no, it depends, I guess, on what I'm talking about that day. If they want to be mad that I'm erasing femininity or masculinity, apparently. But I never got that. I was like, why do you, I've never said that there's no difference between the genders. I've never said that they're exactly the same. I've just said we're people. And I guess this is where some of the misinformation comes in that you were trying to address in your book, is that when you're saying there's not like a male brain or a female brain, you're not saying what maybe they would have thought you were saying, that like it is all the same. Or there is no difference. You're like you said, it's a mosaic, and I guess I'm losing my thought. I'm sorry,
but it's
but
complicated.
I feel like I understand where you're going with your book.
I think what I'm supporting is that we allow everything. We allow the people who want to be stereotypic females to go ahead and do that, and let the little girls wear their fairy outfits and let them grow up and be moms, stay-at-home moms, if that's what they want to do, if that's what they really want to do. And it's not because they're pressured by a gender role, but it's generally what they want to do. And if more women want to be stay-at-home moms compared to men who want to be stay-at-home dads, let's let it have but let's not limit anybody, because it's never going to apply to the entire category of females or males, because everybody's a mosaic.
Yeah.
So
I think what I'm saying is I feel like people are thinking that if there is a difference, if you can point out there's men and women are different, then they must be treated differently. And if you're treating them the same, then you're somehow destroying or diminishing whatever gender they identify as. And I guess that's just something that people have to get past. And hopefully your book does that. If they've connected these two ideas when they don't necessarily, shouldn't be connected. I guess your book would help them to kind of separate and see these in two different spheres. Like they're different,
but on the other hand, I'm also pointing out that every trait has a feminine version, masculine version, just that nobody is on the ends. So we could, by that worldview, I could say, well, empathy is feminine, lack of empathy is masculine. But fortunately, most men have empathy. So fortunately, hardly any men are over here without the empathy. Thank God. There's this other trait, capacity for violence. That's definitely a masculine trait. This is, every study shows that men are way more capable of violence. Okay. The good news is most men don't take this extreme masculine trait. They take a feminine trait. Thank goodness, and but is it helpful to just say, oh no, that's not real, it's because of how they were socialized? Or the socialization is super important. So I don't want anybody to ever stop thinking about why men might be socialized to be violent. I never want that.
Yeah.
What I want us to do is, at the same time, accept that there's also some biologic reasons that have to do with testosterone, the brain development, and take that into account as a way of helping prevent the violence.
A lot of times, and just to get back to your writing the book, a lot of times people write a book because they can't find a book that says what they want to say. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I was looking, maybe it's out there, but I just couldn't find anywhere, YouTube's or any lectures. I could people start to say it, but they talk about, testosterone is this global thing. They just say, yeah, that you get masculinized or feminized. Nobody talks about just this mosaic, just about how we're all not just a mosaic in the various different traits, but also each trait there's a continuum. Every single trait is on a continuum for a number of reasons. So nobody has 100% masculine or feminine of any trait. Well, I might have one trait that's 100% masculine, but of all my traits, the vast majority of them fall close to the center. And so how do we take that and say, well, this is a female brain or a male brain? Well, we can't take a specimen of a brain and look at the structures and be sure that it's a female brain or a male brain. We can't examine it, or by traits. And so where's the line? Well, there's just not one. But there are obviously some ways that society is going to want to segregate men and male from females.
I guess.
So it's a discussion.
Yeah.
It's a discussion that I can't solve this problem. I can't solve the problem of which bathrooms people should be allowed to use. I love that in my city they built a bathrooms where everyone just uses their own stall and we don't have to deal with this issue. I support trans people who want to use the bathroom of their choice, so I personally do that. It doesn't take away that some other person might feel uncomfortable. I wish they wouldn't.
Right.
But I can't solve this problem. But it's a discussion with this information. This information will give us the basis to say, well, then how do we approach this issue of bathrooms or of sports? How do we approach this issue based on real information? And then say, okay, these extreme stances, there might be a reason we at least have to think about. We have to think about, if we just let anyone choose their own bathroom, even if they're not because I don't want to jump into that can of worms.
No, we can leave it. I can,
because I really want to support trans people. They have to go to the bathroom, and I don't want them. But I also think that we have to, if we're going to get anywhere with this issue, we've got to understand what people's reservations are about it, and A, educate them about what the reality is, and then B, kind of say, okay, how can we adjust the rules of society so that we're not causing so much pain and discomfort in the lives of trans people, but at the same time make it acceptable to even the least open-minded people there, so that we don't have these horrible political battles going on that we've got right now that is hurting so many people, right?
I was thinking of the words descriptive versus prescriptive, and I think that might be a good context to talk about gender, is that while we can say like differences in gender are descriptive because they're just describing how things are, I think a lot of people conflate the descriptive with the prescriptive, and that's kind of the
Maven,
issue.
You need to act more like a woman. That would be prescriptive.
Yeah, like if I'm being seen to fail in something that's considered womanly, then I'm being judged, or I'm being like, the measurement for my judgment as a woman is being used. This descriptive scale is being used when it's like, no, it's not. Just because this is how more women are here or how more men are here, doesn't mean that that's where people should be going and prescribing and changing their lives to match. And I guess I would say that's the difference here, the key difference.
And also identifying those areas where being prescriptive might be a little bit helpful, such as designing bras. Okay, we don't need to design lots of bras for men.
That's a good point.
But there are some women who really feel like they need bras, and so we can basically leave men out of that. So I mean,
I just meant like in how
we can't go 100% without grabbing. There are some differences that we just got to accept, right?
Yeah.
And
just
but
because men
there's
are
a lot
stronger
more things
doesn't mean that you're not a man if you're not stronger.
Yeah, there's a few that we got to accept, but there's so many more that we don't need to accept, or that we don't need to say this is any reason to limit you.
And one thing I noticed is a lot of the reviewers comment about how this is a good starting place for conversation. It's a space that they realize that there are scientific books and there's cultural books, and this is sort of bridges the gap, and where you sort of discuss the interaction between those arenas. And so it seems like your book is good for people to buy and read and share. And
I try to be really, really neutral. I try to not bring in any language that is polarizing, because there's just a lot of things. There's just a lot of things I can say. Gender is a social construct. Okay, if I say that, a certain group of people is going to applaud, a certain group of people is going to turn off their brains right there.
Right.
And so I just, I'm not going to say anything like that. And in the book, because I'm trying to appeal to the people in the middle, not with the message. I'm just trying to give the truth, but I'm trying to write to that audience because I think that's who can be moved. The people over here on the left who are already trans allies, they could read this and be awesome because they'd understand why they're trans or why their friends are trans or whatever, or gay. I mean, let's just say this is equally as relevant to gays or lesbians or to the, really good female scientist, all those people. But you also have this group over here who just don't give a damn about science. And so there's no point in them reading it either because God said this and that's it.
Yeah.
So, but that's also a minority.
Majority in the middle,
group in the middle
could learn something.
Being swayed by the arguments. Oh, this Algerian boxer looks so masculine. She has such a strong punch and just wasn't fair. And they're having this very uneducated judgment of that situation.
Yeah.
And I don't comment on that, but I do what I do is I give a very neutral set of information about how gender got to be how it was in the human, in each human and their gender traits. And then let's use that as a starting point for have a discussion about, if we have to have a discussion about trans people in sports, have it be informed by understanding gender to start with, and then understand trans people, and then understand. But I don't get into really what to do with that. I don't talk about whether trans people should be included in sports. I don't talk about bathrooms. I don't talk about any of it. I want to leave that to the reader. But I do think that it'll be better for trans people and gay people like me if the information is correct.
Yeah, if we can at least start on that foundation.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there might be bad people who use this good information in a bad way, but I'm counting on the goodness of humanity that if they have the good information, they're also going to react to it in general in a good way.
That's right.
Help everybody, right?
So everybody knows somebody that could probably use this book. Everybody knows if they can use the book for themselves. And so we recommend you look in the description.
Let me just say it is for middle of the road people too. And it's for parents. If you have a trans child and you want to understand it, this is awesome for you.
Yes. If you want to understand more about the world around and people that you might be associating with, certainly buy this book. And,
it's only $1.
That's right. The 99 cents on the electronic version.
Yeah.
Right, the PDF or whatever. And so
thanks for coming on the show, Dr. Parkinson. Appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you very much. And for
an interesting discussion.
Yes, thanks. And everyone out there, like and subscribe and do the things. Maven and I have some really good shows coming up. Watch your calendar, and everybody have a great rest of 2025. Bye-bye.
Bye.